Assalamu alaikum. Today I will be presenting the anthropological presentation by Faseeh in conjunction with the French colony member Adnan Fokker, who acted as a guide for the presentation of the urban disparity between the French colony and the affluent neighborhoods in the F-7 sector. So without further ado, let's begin. Faseeh in conjunction with Adnan Fokker, a resident of the French colony, examined the stark differences of the socioeconomic aspects between the French colony and the affluent areas situated in close proximity in the F-7 sector. This photo album essentially hopes to present a stark contrast between the different areas in such urban sectors. So let's begin with our first photo. Fazil Rahman began his first incursion into the French colony of the F-7 sector, and immediately one thing that was noticed was the stark contrast between this affluent neighborhoods. What we saw was the lack of pavements, narrow streets, and this very, very permeant smell present in these streets. One of the first observations in these streets was that there was an open lying waste of plastic, garbage, with no proper disposal. The houses often were unpainted with just solid red bricks on the outside. One thing that was also noticed was that the streets were very narrow, the gates were often very rusty, and there were not even any locks on the gates. And usually they were covered with a plastic sheet to act as a sort of barrier between the outside and inside in terms of smell. We also noticed that uh, there were also small businesses. You could see small tuck shops, small repair shops, small collection agencies, garbage collection agencies in these colonies. This is a fundamental picture of the French colony, which you will see everywhere. You can see these barber shops, fruit shops, basically small centers where small businessmen would make their living in these areas. Obviously, as any other place in Islamabad, you can also see some similarities. Obviously, there were fast food shops, snack shops present in wide variety across the entire of the colony. Similar to these butcher shops, you can see. And but one thing that was apparently very obvious is none of these businesses were very large scale. Most of them were run by few individuals without much to offer. Obviously, because it was in accordance to the socioeconomic status of the people living here. Since the streets were narrow, the people didn't have much in terms of wealth. These shops also reflected that in that sense. And as we move on to the more affluent neighborhoods, you'll see the differences in the shops, the streets, and how different it was. In the French colony, one thing that was obviously observed was that even though it was a grid land pattern, you could see that the roads were not paved. And one of the most horrifying discoveries to make about these sectors was that you had religious areas, the churches, because the French colony, as it was, is a highly Christian dense area. And one thing you'll notice is even next to these churches, even next to these houses, there's always this permeating smell because often or not, gutters, sewage will spill onto the street due to lack of proper drainage. And one thing was noticed is that nalas, which we call nullas, basically large waterways of sewage, are present right next to houses, right very much next to the houses. And we'll show you that here. This picture, you can see that this person's house, this child, he lives very much near a open waterway of sewage, garbage, trash. And this is common in pretty much any other area of the French colony. You can see and observe that the houses are right next to these open sewages. They're not painted, they're open brick houses, a very much safety hazard in terms of earthquakes and other disasters. These houses are often the first to be affected. One thing you always notice is again a very, very primitive design with often people resorting to using clothes, wood, and other materials to uh, compensate for the lack of proper development. You can see here that the There's often, again, the very common illustration where garbage is just lying outside the streets in very open view with nothing to properly dispose of them. There are no garbage collection agencies in these regions, and there's very little cleaning at all by the government facilities. In order to notice that, again, you can see a lot of small tuck shops with not a lot of facilities, but again, it is enough for the people there according to the socioeconomic status. And one thing we also saw, again, even though these areas are very much underdeveloped, unsanitary, people still had a large community, and there was a large sense of a community in these areas. Again, this is a very highly Christian area, and there were a lot of churches, a lot of Christian events, and there was a sense of culture in these areas that you usually do not see in big cities like Islamabad, and usually more similar to what you see in small villages and towns. These areas are also a target of rapid demolition by governments, such as the government agencies such as the CDA, which demolish houses rapidly and without any just cause, often depriving people in these areas of their homes. And you can see we can, as we move on, we can see the similar areas, same sewages, the same narrow streets, the same smell, the same underdeveloped houses, the open firing, open gas pipes, absolute safety hazards. And as we move on to a very affluent area of the Islamabad F-7, the Markaz area, you can see the rapid contrast. You can see that the buildings are well developed, they have a plan, the roads are paved with bricks, and the shops are not just small areas. These are massive complexes, massive shops, massive parking areas, well developed greenery, no sewage issues, and the shops are more for recreation than they are for necessities. In the French colony, you would see shops which bare necessities were sold. However, in the F-7 workers, most of these were recreational. You could see flower markets, large parking areas where various amounts of expensive vehicles were parked. The roads, again, you can see are paved, and you can sense that there is, and we have to make this clear that this is right next to the French colony. You can see shops for restaurants, major clothing outlets, massive complexes, well developed roads, and you will never see any open disposal of garbage or any sort of smell in these areas because they are well taken care of by the government agencies and the cleanup agencies of the CDA. And here's a picture of Faseeh conducting his presentation. And again, large complexes, and again, most of these are for recreation. They are jewelry complexes, flower markets, restaurant areas, and obviously clothing areas. There's a large variety of recreation in these areas, which is absolutely absent in the French colony. You can see food being served in major dhabas uh, as well in these areas, and they all accommodate people of all classes. And as we move on, we can see that the one thing you always notice is that the openness of these areas. That- And as we move on, we can also see what we see as the parks. This is a Swiss park, and it is right next to the F-7 markers. And this is an open recreation area that is not afforded to people of the French colony. This area, along with other areas in the F-7 markers, avoid, put a sense of recreation, allow children in these areas, families in the areas to breathe fresh air, walk in the morning without having to be oppressed by a claustrophobic environment. These are open areas which are not afforded to people in the French colony. You can see beautiful planning, beautiful gardening, beautiful uh, projects that these governments, the CDA has afforded to the people of F-7 and only in the affluent neighborhoods. And you can also see that these roads, these paved roads, there's ease of access for the people in